Thank you so much, Hossam and Abdo, for joining me today on Palestine Talks to talk about a few things I'm hoping to cover with you regarding your dismissal, but the larger context in which that occurred and the possibility of there being an anti-Palestinian climate within Microsoft, the company itself, and the future of your activism. So perhaps I can start off by asking Hossam, I know that it's out there already, but briefly, if you could just, for maybe those who might not know, give us a bit of an overview as to what led to your dismissal and how that was connected to the vigil for Gaza.
Thank you so much for having us. So, to start off, I think it's important to ground us in why we are here and why we had this visual, right? For over a year, we've been witnessing an incessant, ongoing, like living nightmare, where we have seen things like videos and sounds and sights that I honestly never expected to witness live on air and to have continue for over a year. I've seen people being burned alive. I've seen babies decapitated. I've seen a father carrying his children in plastic bags. I've seen bodies thrown on the floor. I've seen human remains and mass graves. And the world has continued to either ignore or even justify these horrible actions, this Palestinian Holocaust that we are witnessing. And the victims of those genocide, by some estimates, may be up to 200,000, if not more, are people from our community. You know, we have in Seattle and in Microsoft, people who have lost family, lost friends, lost loved ones. And we thought about how do we create space for those people to come together and to honor the lives and the memory of their loved ones, who they have been deprived of and who Microsoft prevented from having that space. And we specifically were thinking about this through the lens of the 1 year mark, right? The 1 year mark of genocide. How do we honor that? How do we make the moment? And also, how do we make sure that we connected to our labor at Microsoft? Because unfortunately, this is a Microsoft powered genocide. Microsoft is providing crucial infrastructure that automate and accelerate the world's first AI assisted genocide. This is what we're talking about. So we decided to have a visual. You know, it's as diplomatic and as non-confrontation as possible to simply have a space for the community to come together and to grieve and to mourn, and to do it on campus, so that we are able to create that space for our community. And we did, and it was a beautiful showing. We had dozens of people in person. We have over 100 people join the live stream to connect with us, and people, we honored the lives of our martyrs. Our community came together to hold space, to grieve, and to mourn, and also to have the courage to talk about how our labor at Microsoft is connected to those crimes, is connected to that genocide. And that did not sit with Microsoft executives who profit off of that genocide, whose livelihood is benefiting from the genocide. To Microsoft, the images of Microsoft employees coming together and honoring the lives of the genocide that they are empowering is more offensive than the images and sights and sounds that we have seen over a year of that same genocide that they are funding. Microsoft saw enough of an offense in our gathering that immediately that same day, mere hours after the vigil had concluded, decided to give me and Abdo a phone call, simply letting us know that our employment with Microsoft had been terminated effective immediately. They thought that by doing that, they would silence our movement. They would deter us from talking about Microsoft's complicity in the genocide, but it's only galvanized us more. It's only made our voice stronger. And we simply refuse to allow Microsoft to tell us that Arab lives are ungrievable, that Palestinian children, by some estimates, 16, 17,000 children killed, are unmournable, that Arab lives are unworthy of mention, unworthy of grief, unworthy of talking about. And it's simply unacceptable in this day and age to work for a company that claims that it stands for human rights, that claims that it has commitments to empower every person, organization to achieve more, and at the same time have it turn around and completely empower and be complicit in the obliteration of our people.
Before the actual dismissal, in your experience, were there any red flags or indicators that would reflect that there's actually a bigger problem of anti-Palestinian discrimination within Microsoft?
Red flags is an understatement. I think there has been very, very clear unapologetic signs of anti-Palestinian racism. And my own experience with that goes back to less than a year after I joined Microsoft in 2022,
Mhm.
when I posted a question on an internal Q&A platform, shortly after Microsoft decided to halt all sales of its products to Russia following the invasion of Ukraine. And I simply asked, about the double standard. I commended Microsoft for its commitment to human rights and upholding international law. But I simply asked, like, when do we decide to uphold these values? Is it only when the victims are white, and is it only when it's politically convenient? And I mentioned multiple examples, actually. I talked about the Uyghurs in China. I talked about the bombing of Syria, Yemen. I talked about the invasion of Iraq. And then I talked about the events of the year prior, the Sheikh Jarrah events, when Israel was, murdering Palestinian women and children with impunity, and there wasn't even a statement of solidarity, let alone a move towards any sort of sanctions or divestment from Israel. Um, and that question was apparently offensive enough to launch an investigation by HR that was conducted by someone who revealed later that they're an Israeli woman. And it grilled me for 2 hours over my political views, claimed that I was so-called singling out Israel, even though I told her I'm literally providing multiple examples, and you're the one who's singling out Israel in this situation. And kind of asking me very pointed questions that try to corner me into saying something that could be more incriminating, asking me about Hamas or whatnot, and even at some point asking me, "Are you aware that Arabs are actually thriving in Israel?" When saying that Israel is committing apartheid against Palestinian people by the words of Israeli human rights organizations themselves. So that investigation was thankfully didn't lead to any sort of sanctions, but it was my first interaction, my first confrontation with this culture of repression and censorship and silence, and frankly, the Palestine exception to everything, including in simply asking a question, right?
Mhm.
And then we fast forward to 2023 and October 7 and the start of the genocide, and immediately Microsoft tells us exactly where they stand. They immediately send a statement that says that we stand with Israel, and they have completely ignored any mention of Palestinians, of Gaza, or of the people at that point when they released the statement. Already hundreds, if not thousands, of people had been killed. Completely did not mention them, did not mention their Palestinian employees. And then they had a banner at their employee donations portal with the big Israeli flag, again saying we stand with Israel, inviting people to donate to Israeli organizations. And then when an internal group simply asked them to treat both sides equally, it simply asked them to acknowledge the humanity of Palestinian people, those questions, those requests completely fell on deaf ears. In fact, Microsoft did the exact opposite. They began silencing its Palestinian community. They began closing down discussion threads. They began censoring and blocking any sort of Palestinian content by employee groups. They disinvited external speakers who were supposed to come and talk about Palestinian history and culture. They even imposed this frankly ridiculous rule that says that that any employee group cannot host events that are so-called educational, and then they use that very vague and umbrella term of an educational event to shut down events as simple as a trivia night, to celebrate Arab Heritage Month, which again the company refused to even acknowledge or send an email about it anyway, even though internal groups communicated it before. They used that same umbrella to block a Palestinian employee from being able to talk about her family and talk about her own heritage in a regularly scheduled employee spotlight series, simply because, again, by talking about her family history, she's talking about the Nakba, and that is deemed educational by the Microsoft overlords and then completely blocked and censored for months.
Mhm.
And this is frankly the tip of the iceberg. And then kind of culminating with my own personal experience and confrontation with like a very blatant a form of that double standard when I started being a little bit more involved on these internal forums, and I started talking about Palestine again in very humanitarian and very diplomatic terms, and humanizing them, and talking about my own personal experience, my own friends, my own community members who have lost family. And then at one point, I posted a comment which said quite simply that with or without your sympathy, Palestinians will attain the dignity, the freedom, the liberation, and the respect that they deserve everywhere from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. And that comment, again, was offensive enough to trigger a 3-month investigation by the workplace investigations team. Multiple calls. The two investigators, one of them, interestingly, was an FBI agent that served in the FBI for 13 years before she joined Microsoft. And then I had a second investigation about a meme that I posted that said that Israel is committing genocide against Palestinians in Gaza. And then the result of these two was I was found to actually have violated Microsoft's anti-harassment, anti-discrimination policy in 2 counts, and against protected status of religion, ethnicity, national origin. And then that meant that they punished me with pretty much every lever that they could pull at the time, short of termination until I was actually terminated. But they had financial sanctions. They took away my bonus, my salary increase, my stock awards. They put a mark on my performance, which meant that I couldn't get promoted for a year. They banned me from that forum for 6 months. They forced me to do like 13 DNI trainings in 2 weeks. They imposed all of these like very severe sanctions. Meanwhile, I personally reported 21 different people, a 19-page email that I sent in desperation, like desperately asking Microsoft to do the absolute bare minimum of their job to stop the harassment and the anti-Arab, anti-Palestinian, anti-Muslim rhetoric that they had let proliferate with impunity on their platforms. People calling me no one who simply hates Jews. People saying that I'm a terrorist. I'm a supporter of terrorism. I'm a member of Hamas. So people justifying the murder of Palestinian children. People justifying the bombings of schools and hospitals. And then even, interestingly, someone saying that between the river and the sea, Israel will forever be. And I reported all of these comments, and within 3 weeks, like they finished the entire investigation, and they basically told me that not a single person that I had reported was found to be in violation of the exact same policy that I was found to be in violation of. And I asked about, the double standard, the very clear double standard between someone saying, Palestinians deserve freedom between the Jordan and the Mediterranean, and someone saying between the river and the sea, Israel will forever be. And they simply had no words. They simply had no response. Especially when I pointed out that if anything, they're not equivalent. Like his is way worse, because what does it mean to have an Israel from the river to the sea, right? It means that at the very least, one of genocide, ethnic cleansing, or apartheid. Because how else are you going to have an Israel from the river to the sea? What are you going to do with the Palestinians who live there? And the reality is, Israel is actually committing all of those three right now, powered by Microsoft. And they had no response for that. So the culture of anti-Arab and anti-Palestinian racism is quite pervasive. I'm not the only one. I know of many people who reported some quite heinous comments, and I'm not aware of a single person who was found to be in violation of the same policy that I was found to be in violation of. And I think that this most recent incident of them quite literally preventing us from even honoring the lives of our people, quite literally like mourning our the victims of the genocide from our community, is yet the latest chapter in that saga.
It's staggering, Hossam, what you're saying, for many reasons, of course, and one being what I was talking to Abdo about, and that's the global human rights statement that Microsoft has on its website, which says that it's committed to honoring the lives of all people, expressly in accordance with UN conventions and principles and so forth. And so I want to ask Abdo, like, do you have any insight into why they would post something like that? Yet, hearing what Hossam is saying, they are applying this double standard. And not only that, what is really surprising, or maybe not, to hear Hossam talk about is that immediately um, after October 7th, or just after October 7th, they did take a side, right? So they're saying, we're standing with Israel. I think, trying to maybe set an example for the staff to do the same. So, but anyway, the question really um, that I'm hoping you can answer is like why this, statement, this global human rights statement, but the double standard exists in Microsoft.
Yeah, and this is 100% like one of the things that we have been looking at for a year, more than a year, on reading what Microsoft is committed to do. Microsoft in this statement is committed to protecting human rights, is committed to protecting human rights defenders, is committing to a wide range of protocols and a wide range of conventions, like the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, like the Geneva Conventions and its protocols, like the Rome Statute, the International Criminal Court. But what we see actually happen in practice is, again, the Palestine exception. We see Microsoft business practices. We see how Microsoft is continuing to enable Israeli human rights violations that have been called out by non-governmental organizations, that have been called by the United Nations, that have been called by Human Rights Watch, Save the Children, Doctors Without Borders. We see them being called out, these violations, and Microsoft, instead of taking a step and recognizing that maybe Microsoft needs to take the proactive approach and go and conduct a human rights impact assessment, which is actually also mentioned in the human rights statement that they have. Instead of doing that, they are going about it from a business perspective of we need to maintain these contracts, we need to continue to tout and promote how we are sponsoring the Israeli military computing unit. And we see on the other side, Israeli officials go on the record and say, we cannot achieve what we have been achieving in Gaza without the Azure cloud services, without these big tech companies' complicity, without the technologies that Microsoft is keen on selling right now as a cloud first and an AI first company. And that's at the core of it. This idea of not following the human rights statements, this idea of not going proactively and conducting a human rights impact assessment. It's at the end of the day is that Microsoft is complicit. Microsoft is enabling that Israeli genocide.
Do you feel that Microsoft, just because of its outsized influence within the larger culture that we live in, that your dismissal was a way of chilling not only Palestinian activism or opposition to the Israeli genocide, Israeli-led genocide, but the larger culture that we live in. So people, not only who are employees, but the public, the general public, essentially.
I mean, 100% it's an escalation, right? Microsoft within its internal platforms have really tried to censor pro-Palestinian voices, try to silence people speaking out, trying to intimidate people who are trying to hold Microsoft as a company accountable for its complicity. We had, as Hossam mentioned, many threads where we would be asking a simple question as, hey, how is our labor being used in these or being tied to these Israeli human rights violations? And these threads and these questions at the Q&A forums, at the internal discussion boards would either get dismissed, would either simply get closed with no explanation why it was closed. And it simply is, this is a pattern, right? We cannot disconnect what Microsoft have done here from repression, from intimidation, from retaliation against us, from the growing pattern across big tech companies like Meta and Google, right? And thinking about what these companies and these tactics that are being used, they are simply intimidation tactics to set a precedent. And it's a dangerous precedent. It's a precedent that you cannot speak out. You cannot hold these company executives and multi-trillion-dollar companies accountable for their human rights violation or their complicity in human rights violation, and set the precedent that if you speak out, this what will happen to you. If you speak out, we are willing to do what it takes to disrupt your livelihood. We're willing to do what it takes to censor our violence. And to Hossam's point earlier, they fear that as humans and as employees and as workers, we are holding them accountable. So they would rather remove us and make an example out of us to deter people from speaking out, to silence their voices, and to essentially make it loud and clear within Microsoft, but also outside Microsoft, within Google, but also outside Google, and within these tech companies, but outside of them, that speaking out has a cost. But what I say, and I want to emphasize here, is for people to recognize that when we speak out, we need to be more concerned about what would we lose if we did not speak out versus what would we lose if we spoke out.
Surely. I mean, how do you feel that other employees, just generally speaking, would carry out their work during this time? I mean, how do they see their work, knowing what Microsoft is doing, contributing to the Israeli army, to the violence in Gaza? Like, how did they view it as, for example, something that was just their job and they had no obligation to say anything about it, or were there allies you had like that were doing similar to you and they experienced similar pushback, like among employees themselves? Like, what was the experience?
Honestly, the experience has been positive. We are bringing education to our workers and our colleagues and our community to understand that these big tech companies are not disconnected from what's happening to our people in Gaza, right? In the midst of the 9 to 5, the non-stop work streams that Microsoft is pushing people to do, right? People sometimes miss the point on how we can be complicit, how our labor is being used and utilized. And as No Azure for Apartheid, which is a worker-led group, our goal is to both demand from Microsoft to sever those ties and end those contracts with the Israeli military and government, but also to educate the people and raise the awareness on what angles of complicity are there. And that's essentially what we have seen. We have seen in our termination, people coming together within company platform and reiterating our demands, asking the same tough questions again, speaking out even more. So it's actually the opposite. Microsoft thought by terminating us, by setting this example and precedent, that they would deter us. But what we are seeing is the community coming together in ways that we have not seen before. We are more energized. We are more uplifted. We show commitment, and it's unwavering commitment to our people in Palestine and supporting them in their fight for justice and freedom.
Yes, actually, I wanted to ask you about your activism now. Like, has the dismissal emboldened? I'll ask you both. So maybe Abdo, you can speak first, and then Hossam. The impact that dismissal had on your activism, has it emboldened you, or has it had some effect to make you reconsider, or how has it, for better or worse, affected your activism?
I mean, I'll speak personally, and I'll let Hossam share as well. Is it energized me? It anchored me in the real need for us to do this work. It anchored me in the real need to speak out for those who can no longer speak out for themselves. It anchored me in understanding that we need to go and build a community, that we need to go and build a world where the well-being of everyone is significant, where it's not seen as exceptional that we go out and call the injustice against our people. It's actually something that we owe each other. And that anchoring and that grounding is the energy that I am willing to go and build on top of So in a way, it's energizing, it's uplifting, and seeing the community support. It's humbling, it's heartwarming. It's seeing people reach out to check in on us. It's seeing people reach out to connect us to job opportunities after the termination. It's seeing people reach out to make sure that everyone is safe. And that's really something that I'm trying to really push and internalize through this is we keep us safe, we protect us. We need in our activism about Palestine, about other issues, to bridge those gaps and build those relationships and build that community that can really build a world where we don't see, where we honor our Palestinian martyrs and make sure that they don't fall victims to continuous genocide and continuous massacres by the Israeli military.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Abdo. And what about yourself, Hossam?
I mean, I want to second everything that Abdo said about the community support has been absolutely humbling and heartwarming and quite beautiful to witness, to be honest. But I think let me be like very, very clear. Like I am absolutely undeterred. My voice is completely unshaken, and my commitment to the liberation of the Palestinian people has never been stronger. We do not do this kind of work. We do not engage in this kind of speaking out without knowing that there is some risk that's involved with that. And that's not to say that, I'm just throwing away my job for no reason. Definitely didn't expect for me to be fired over holding a visual, I'll tell you that. But at the end of the day, I am always grounded in remembering what's coming out of Gaza, remembering the sacrifices and the huge toll, the huge loss that people there are forced to sacrifice. They do not choose to be in that position, right? And they are forced to sacrifice that because of our tax dollars, because of our labor, and because of our silence, because of our collective world's silence and painful indifference, right? So in the face of that, this is, in my opinion, one of the gravest moral travesties of our time. This is the Holocaust of our time. If anybody is thinking about like, what would I be doing in the Holocaust? You are doing it right now. And I'm proud to be the person who lost his job because of hosting a vigil to honor the victims of the Holocaust. And there is absolutely no sacrifice that we can make living in this country that will amount to anything close to what the people in Gaza and the people in Palestine are enduring and sacrificing. And we are not better than them. We are not more worthy than them to do that. So this has only made my commitment to the cause even stronger. And it's only made my will to expose Microsoft's crimes, to talk about Microsoft's complicity in the genocide even stronger. And if anything, part of me is a little grateful to Microsoft. I have more time now to organize, and I also have in my back pocket like a very clear example of this double standard, of these companies' complicity, like that is so brazen, so unapologetic that it's hard to hand wave away. It's hard to not sit with this and talk about why do we have this double standard, and then bring it back to the core of the issue, which is Microsoft's complicity in the genocide and apartheid. And I think that it's important for me to emphasize a point that people sometimes, when we say like no Azure for apartheid, or when we say, Microsoft is complicit, people think we're talking about Microsoft is selling Windows or emails to the Israeli military or stuff like that. And that's true. That does actually happen. But we're talking about something that's much more sinister and much, much deeper, which is the fact that Microsoft is selling cloud, AI, and storage services, cloud services, to the Israeli military directly, not just to the government, to the Israeli military directly. And that forms a core part of the infrastructure, the technological infrastructure that has allowed Israel to automate its genocide, to use AI to decide who gets to live, who gets to die, to decide who is a so-called terrorist or not, to decide when and who and how to bomb. Like it completely reduces the Palestinian from his humanity, strips him of his humanity, reduces him to a mere number, mere algorithms, to give a cowardly soldier in a control room the ability to press a button and condemn his entire family to be perished, right? That is what we're talking about here. And I think that, to your point, people are starting to realize that. People are starting to realize that. And people do not want their labor to be used for genocide, believe it or not. Like, no matter how Microsoft execs try to word it or wordsmith it or weasel out of the question or shut down conversations about it, the truth is your average person, your average American, does not want genocide, does not want his tax dollars being used to commit genocide, does not want his labor to be used to further the act of genocide. And that is something that is growing. That's a realization that is growing within Microsoft, within the tech sector. And Microsoft is not going to be able to just sweep it under the rug by firing 2 people.
Right. And what I find really troubling about what you said earlier about Microsoft trying to, or they did make you undergo training. Did you have to take those trainings? Just to, yeah, it almost sounds like within the culture of Microsoft, they're forcing people to think of Israel in a different way, in a dishonest way. They're trying to actually condition people to think in terms of lies. This is the other upsetting thing, is because, see, you, to both of your credit, right, you are, these principled voices and sort of forces for change, for good. And you can facilitate, help facilitate others' understanding about what's going on by having these discussions. Yet Microsoft is not only saying no, they're trying to, and I don't know if I would have known that, or if it's been documented anywhere, that internally Microsoft is trying to frame Israel as a non-genocidal force, as non-apartheid, as democratic, Palestinians as, the vilified other, and so forth. And they went to some great lengths, it sounds, to get you to think this way. It wasn't just that they were punishing you for speaking out against the violence, but that, to me, that is something that I will leave this discussion thinking a lot more about and trying to make sense of, because that is almost Kafkaesque, getting employees to think about reality differently, totally differently, in a way that's untrue. So I appreciate you sharing these details, things that we just would not have heard otherwise. So thank you so much, Hossam and Abdo, for this most illuminating discussion. Troubling to be sure, but I think it will be engaging for many and mobilize many. But before we wrap up, I'm wondering if either of you, both of you, have any final thoughts or observations you'd like to share. Maybe Abdul would like to go through this.
Yeah, maybe I'll just say this. This is something that I ended, like when we were at the vigil, I ended my speech with something along the lines of, for hours, for days, for months, for a year, we thought about, when can I speak up? Where should I speak up? How should I speak up? Right? And I'm telling people through this platform and for the days to come that every second is the right second to speak up, and every place is the right place to speak up, and every way is the right way to speak up. We have to reject this business as usual. We have to reject censoring our voices. We cannot afford to continue to see how our people are being massacred in Gaza and in Palestine. And we will reject the company, Microsoft, or any other company. We will reject these companies using our labor to be complicit in human rights violation and the murder of our own people. And we'll continue to do that. We'll continue to speak out, and we'll continue to build that community where it's safe for everyone to speak out.
Yes, thank you. And Hossam?
One of the first and more important things I want to say is just to speak to the Palestinian people directly, like to any Palestinian who's hearing us, to any Palestinian who's in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Palestine, or anywhere in the world. Like, I want you to know that there are still people with a conscience in this world. There are still people with a heart. There are still people who care and will not stay silent, who refuse to stay silent and stay complicit in the world's first AI-assisted live stream genocide. And we will not leave you alone. We will not forget you, and we will fight tooth and nail. We will do whatever it takes to make sure that we stop this genocide today before tomorrow. And I personally took a personal commitment, a personal promise to the Palestinian people shortly after October 7th, shortly after we started seeing the scenes of the evolving genocide, that I am not going to withhold any sort of privilege I have, any voice I have, any little power I have from doing whatever it takes to speak about Palestine, to fight for this cause of liberation, knowing with conviction and with the clearest resolve that history will do us justice. Even if today we are vilified, even if today we lose our jobs or we lose our livelihoods or whatever else, knowing that history will look favorably upon those who dare to speak up, and history will not look favorably upon those who continue to stay silent, about those who were complicit, about those who funded and enabled this genocide. That is the thing I am have the most conviction of in my life. And then lastly, I want to kind of end with a similar message to Abdo's, just like kind of echoing or borrowing from something I said during the vigil as well. And it's interesting to me. It was foreshadowing, and I had no idea that it was foreshadowing. But in the speech that I gave at the vigil, I also said, I'm often asked, like, are you not scared to be fired? Are you not scared to be deported? Are you not scared of speaking out? And my question is always, aren't you scared? Aren't you scared of being complicit? Aren't you scared in being silent in the face of the Holocaust of our time? Aren't you scared of what you will tell your children and grandchildren when they ask you, where were you when the Gaza genocide was happening?
Yes.
So I want everybody to think about that and to understand that this really is the moment. If you ever thought, what would I do if there was a Holocaust? What would I do during slavery? What would I do during Jim Crow? You're doing it now.
Absolutely. That is a very powerful point. Makes me wonder, what will happen to those people when they do realize that they were complicit 20, 30, how many years down the road, whether they can live with themselves or how they're going to even deal with that. Not that that's the most important issue right now. Of course, the lives of Palestinians is, but that's a very powerful point, Hossam, and I think more people should take the long view. That's sort of why I was asking Abdo about like the work culture and whether people just see doing this work that's enabling the genocide as just their job and then going home. But I think when you frame things just like you said right now and get people to think seriously about these questions, it can shift consciousness, transform their consciousness in ways that I don't think it's a far stretch to describe as revolutionary, because that will lead them onto the path of allyship and activism and so forth. So thank you so much for this discussion. And really, I think it's so important for people to understand what the internal world of Microsoft looks like, and to also take strength from your own courage. So. Thank you both, Hossam and Abdo, for this special conversation.